Many of you have probably heard that Shockwave Totem is very good in this league, but most likely you have heard about the version that deals elemental damage. But what if I told you that the poison version is just as good, especially when you compare it in terms of cost effectiveness? So if you want to know more about the poison Shockwave Totem, you've found just the right video. I will start my video with answering the two main questions: how much does this build cost and how much is its DPS? If we look at my PoB, we see that we have almost 20 million DPS, but this is our minimum, because if we activate Focus, Unholy Might and 4 stacks of Withered, our damage goes up to 35 million, which is the maximum for any build. Of course, this is not the triple digits that we like to strive for when creating a new build, but it still looks like a pretty solid DPS to me. As for the cost of this build, it cost me 13 Divine Orbs. But when I started making this guide and decided to check the prices of items again, unfortunately the prices of some of them increased. So at the time of making this video, you need 18 to 20 Divine Orbs. I often get comments that the price of more than 10 Divine Orbs is very expensive for the build, and for such a price it should kill Uber bosses at one shot. But I still think it's quite a reasonable price for such damage. Now let's talk about what items you need for this build. The first thing you need is the Astral Projector Ring, which is the key item. Shockwave Totem does quite a lot of damage, but its main problem is that it deals damage all around itself. And that makes it very difficult to use and very uncomfortable, but with this ring we get rid of this problem. Ming's Heart is another unique ring that is a must because it does a huge amount of damage. According to the PoB, Ming's Heart gives us 12 million DPS. That's pretty impressive numbers, especially considering the fact that this ring only costs 1 Divine Orb. It has some disadvantages, but we'll talk about them later. Also, you need Skin of the Lord with Ancestral Bound and the Devouring Diadem with increased duration of ailments you inflict while focused. For the Devouring Diadem, try to get an enchant Increased Temporal Chains curse effect. If I have already mentioned curses, then let's divert our attention away from items and talk about curses, because this is a very important aspect and one of our main sources of damage. In 3.20, the developers significantly buffed curses, and now they work better against bosses. I use 2 curses of Despair, which decreases chaos resistance, and Temporal Chains, which increases the duration of our poison on enemies. As I said before, our DPS is 35 million, but that's with 2 active curses. Without them, our damage goes down to 10 million. As you understand, this is a huge difference, so increasing the effect of curses is very important in this build. For example, increasing curse effect by 5% gives us about 1.2 million damage, so I strongly recommend not to ignore this attribute. As you may have already noticed, we use self-cast for our curses. It's not very convenient, but we can't do it any other way, because we use a new unique jewel, the Balance of Terror, which allows us to inflict Withered for 2 seconds if we cast Despair in the past 10 seconds. Withered gives us a significant damage boost, so don't forget to use Despair and of course Temporal Chains. Besides the Balance of Terror, we also use Intuitive Leap, which allows us to save some skill points, and Brutal Restraint, which increases our poison damage and gives us Dexterity. And of course, clusters, how could it be without them? We will need 4 clusters, 2 large and 2 medium. Large clusters can be expensive, but you can always craft them yourself or lose some damage and buy cheaper ones. Jewels are a good and cheap source of damage, so don't ignore them. Try to find them with increased damage with poison, global physical damage, totem damage, and if possible, increased maximum life. This jewel increases your damage by 1 million and you can buy it for 50 Chaos Orbs or even cheaper. That is probably all I wanted to tell about the items for this build, and if you want to know more about the rest of the equipment, I strongly recommend to see my PoB. Link to it you will find in the description to this video. One of the pros of this build is damage. 35 million DPS is a very good number. Also it's damage, that's why this build is very good to kill bosses and do Maven's invitations. In addition, we use totems, which will make it even easier to kill endgame bosses. We put our totems, use curses, and then just dodge the boss's abilities and watch as our totems destroy endgame content. The fact that we use totems cannot be attributed to the pros, because the builds with totems have a very specific playstyle, which is not suitable to most players. Personally, I have nothing against totems, and I even like this playstyle. Now on your screen you can see the process of clearing T16 map, and despite the fact that we use totems and poison, you cannot say that this is a very slow build. Mobs die fast enough, but sometimes you have to go back to get the loot and it slightly slows you down. But this is a feature of most builds, which use totems, so you'll have to get used to it. Also, this build is perfect for the new league mechanics. We easily kill all the guards off screen and don't get any damage in return, and the final boss dies in seconds. Right now, you can see on your screen how quickly the final boss of Sanctum dies. So if you're interested in farm Sanctums, this might be just what you were looking for. Overall, this build can do just about any content in the game with the exception of Uber bosses. We have enough damage for Uber bosses, but we have a very weak defense. Bad defense is the main cons of my build. You certainly won't die from random white mobs, but you need to play carefully, and on very rare occasions you will die from random one-shot. We have low HP because we have lots of unique items that don't give us HP. Also, we have no spell suppression at all, due to the unique items in the build and the fact that we have a hard time adding it to our rare items. We can get 100% spell suppression, but then this build will cost not 18 divine orbs, but over 100. And for me it's too expensive and not reasonable, but if you like min-max builds it might be a good challenge for you. And if with small HP you can still play, then the lack of spell suppression will be very felt, especially if you get used to play with builds where you have 100% spell suppression. I personally feel very comfortable to play this build, and thanks to totems and high damage value, I'm 90% of the time killing the whole endgame content deathless. So, in theory you should be able to kill some Uber bosses with this build if you know their mechanics and can dodge their abilities. So it's all in your hands. And at the end of this video, I want to tell how to level this character. I started with Spark, because it's a very good and comfortable skill. At level 28 you will get an option to use Shockwave Totem, but I don't recommend to do this. It's better to continue using Spark. And from level 40 you can play as Shockwave Totem build, because that's when we can use Astral Projector. Also, we need Hrimsoro because elemental damage is much better than pure physical damage. Right after the 10th act you can make a respec to poison build, but personally I would recommend doing it after level 80 because we need a lot of skill points. Also, you can continue to use Spark till the end of the campaign or even during the white and yellow maps, and only after level 80 you can do respec to poison build. More information about leveling you can find in my PoB. That's all for me, and so it's time to say goodbye to you. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Also, I will be very grateful to you for the likes and subscriptions to my channel. Bye everyone, and see you in my next videos.